आचार्य एस.एन. रातंजनकर फाउंडेशन तथा भवन के संगीत और नर्तन शिक्षा पीठ की ओर से आप सब रसिक श्रोताओं का हार्दिक स्वागत है। श्रोताओं, जैसे कि आपको ज्ञात होगा, हमने हमारे फाउंडेशन के वार्षिक कार्यक्रमों के अंतर्गत ये लेक्चर डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन की श्रृंखला जारी रखी है। आज से हम एक सुप्रसिद्ध विचारवंत संगीतज्ञ, गायक, एक उच्च कोटि के वक्ता और लेखक डॉक्टर अशोक रानडे जी के लेक्चर आज से आरंभ कर रहे हैं। डॉक्टर रानडे जी हमारे बीच उपस्थित हैं। मैं स्वयं अपनी ओर से, आप सबों की ओर से, फाउंडेशन की ओर से और संगीत और नर्तन शिक्षा पीठ की ओर से उनका हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूं। और उन्होंने हमारे निमंत्रण को स्वीकार करके अपने ज्ञान का लाभ देने के लिए जो अपना मौल्यवान समय देकर यहाँ आने का कष्ट किया है, उसके लिए मैं उन्हें आभार धन्यवाद देता हूँ। आज का विषय है संस्कृति संगीत शास्त्र एक परिचय, इंट्रोडक्शन टू एथनोम्यूजिकोलॉजी। मैं डॉक्टर रानडे जी से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे मंच पर आए और कार्यक्रम को शुरू करें।
I am very happy to be with you this evening to discuss a new branch of musical thinking, which in spite of being in fashion is important. Everybody today swears by the name of ethnomusicology, quite often without understanding the import of the term. And that's why I felt that it is essential to discuss a theme with you, which is going to assume more and more importance in the coming days. I strongly believe that in India, lecture is a foreign institute. We don't accept lectures. We suffer them. We tolerate lecturers because we are bound by a curriculum. India always believed in discussion. India always believed in questions and answers. Whether it was philosophy, music, medicine, Durga Vidya, whatever, you will find that people always discuss things. So I am going to discuss things with you, and please feel free to raise a question whenever you like during the discourse, and I will be very happy to carry on the discussion. As has already been announced, what would be the content of this particular lecture? It has been announced as lecture demonstration. Actually, a demonstration would be only of the goodwill of you and me together. The demonstration part, I strongly believe again that when you think about music, you should not mix performance in that. It usually ends up by diluting the content of your thinking process. What you cannot explain, what is likely to raise controversies, we try to cover up by performances. That should never happen. If we want to discuss ideas, they are to be discussed. If they want to perform ideas, they are to be performed. You should not believe in two-in-one quality ice creams. So I have divided this series of presentations format-wise in three kinds. Today I would discuss ideas with you. Next time, Pandit Omkarnath ji's selective recordings would be played, and I will discuss the recordings with you. And on the third occasion, if you still have the persistence to attend my lectures and presentations, I would try to sing. Fortunately, I believe that I can sing. Though I am not successful in convincing others that I do sing, not very often. But that, I think, is an occupational risk. So I don't mind taking that risk. So today let us begin by discussing this new discipline which is as old as 2000 years old. People fall in trap of using terminology which is not familiar to them and they get enamored of it. Such is the thing with the term ethnomusicology. In the earlier days, in 1960s, when the term was bandied about, it was used to describe all non-Western music. But actually, the content of the discipline is very simple. It means that culture and music are to be studied together. That's the first premise. In other words, it means you cannot understand a particular culture unless you study the music which is produced by that culture. You cannot understand a particular music unless you study the parent culture. This is the premise of the discipline. Further, it also means that music is so important that it cannot be left to the musicians alone. Just as Napoleon said about wars, he said wars are so important that they cannot be left to the generals alone. That's why politicians always begin the war, generals carry them on. Similarly, cultural thinkers realize very early that music is so important, they must try to understand it. Musicians, by and large, when they are permeated with their own music, do tend to study culture in their own ways. But there has been period, and many periods in the history of India, when we have forgotten this lesson, that music can be important if it is viewed in the perspective of culture. And then we have produced books which only deal with musical grammars, musicians who only believe in their own voices, and musicologists who believe only in grammatical productions. I will make some points now, and at every point I would invite you to discuss. In case you feel like raising problems, as I said, please feel free. Firstly, try to understand that culture does not mean fine arts. Culture also means behavior patterns. Culture also means how you sit. Culture also means how you stand up. Culture also means how you listen to music. Culture also means how you perform for different audiences. So, culture does not mean fine arts. This is extremely important to understand. Similarly, music does not mean raga music. It's very unfortunate that people in India and abroad claim to know Indian music when they only know raga music. Raga music, to use contemporary terminology, constitutes only 3.5% of musical output in India. We have primitive music, which is not only produced by tribals. We also produce primitive music. What is disco music? It is primitive music. What is garba music? It is primitive music. Why? I will come back to that. But the point is that there are 5 categories of musical expression in India, and unless you are able to understand all of them, you do not have a right to talk about Indian music. You may say, I am talking about Hindustani music. We may tolerate that. But if you start talking about Indian music, when you know only one kind of raga music in India, you do not have a right to talk of Indian music. We have, as I said, primitive music. We have folk music. Are we aware that there are more than 17 systems of folk music which are well documented in India? We have devotional music. Every region in India has its own devotional music. We have, of course, art music. How many varieties of art music are we aware of? Basically only 2. We talk of Carnatic and Hindustani. What happens to Northeast India? Do you mean to say that all the raga music which they produce is to be assumed under the garb of Hindustani music or Carnatic music? It is totally different. They may use the same terms, but they do not mean the same music by them. And this one has to understand. What happens to Sopana music in the Kerala? Right from 1830s, people have been talking of Sopana music as a different kind of art music. But we have not cared to have a look at it and try to see whether the grammatical structures which are given in that music, do they really tally with what you feel of art music? We are not bothered about that. Now Tamil Nadu comes up and says, we have a different kind of raga music. And the claims are made. I am quite sure Odisha will come up next. Why? Just like languages, people are saying that we are not dialects, we are full-fledged languages. Similarly, people are saying that our musical systems are art music and we are different from Hindustani, we are different from Karnataka. If we are serious about studying Indian music, we'll have to study these properly. Then of course we have popular music. Popular music does not mean that which is liked by many. Popular music is a technical term. To give you an example, film music is one constituent of it. But all media propagated music is popular music. All stadium songs are popular music. All political songs are popular music. All jingles that you hear are popular music. All the motor horns which try to, imitate Beethoven up to Jaya Jagdish Hare is a popular music. And all these 5 categories of music are legitimately musical. Let's not sit on this podium and in this audience and think in a highbrow fashion and say raga music is the only music. No. If 80% of people in India like Hindustani film music, Hindi film music, you must have a reason to inquire why do they like it. You can't just brush away by saying these young people do not understand the glorious heritage of India. Very few of us really understand that. We only talk of that. So let us do away with these exaggerations and fashionable positions in theory. And let us ask ourselves very frankly, do we really have a good idea of all these 5 categories of music? And I'm sure that we will say no, we don't have. Then this is the first point made, that if Indian culture means all this, then Indian music means all this. And unless these two are understood in relation to each other, you will not be able to make sense of it. I will make 1 or 2 more points and then I will also try to give you a concrete case. Ethnomusicology. When people started talking of it, as I said, in 1960s, when I started working in the university in 1969, I began inquiring into various theory subjects which have arrived new on the scene of music theory, which included psychoacoustics of music, musical acoustics, musical pedagogy, voice culture, etc., many others. One of them was ethnomusicology. And I realized that if culture and music are to be studied together, then this cannot be a new thing. Because people have been thinking of culture and music together for centuries. They may not have called it by that name. But every time there is a new discipline, it comes up because there is a new need felt for it. Nobody talked of musical acoustics in 1930s. I mean, you are all aware, if you have read Pandit Bhatkandeji, he quotes Blaserna and others, but he says, okay, this is another branch. But nobody took it very seriously. Now we study architectural acoustics. Now we want to have a good hall. We want to have a good recording. We have been talking of it as a very living discipline now. So things change. What happens to cultural musicology? Now this is another term I am introducing. Because people were fighting shy of the term ethnomusicology, in 1969 I used the term cultural musicology. I said, okay, I am trying to understand music in the total perspective of culture. So it would be cultural musicology. And of course, I wrote a paper And as I wrote the paper, nobody read it, but I read it myself twice, and I felt, well, I have made a beginning. Now what does it mean? I asked this question to myself. Why is it that I do not appreciate and understand vocal music of another culture, but I appreciate and likely to understand instrumental music of another culture? It's a simple question. And you will analyze to yourself. If it is Carnatic music, you are able to understand veena, you are able to appreciate violin, also perhaps mridangam, but what about vocal singing? No. Why? Ethnomusicology makes it a premise that as human voice is more integral to that culture, unless you are immersed in the culture, you will not appreciate the vocal music produced by that culture. Easy to understand. Same thing happens in case of symphony music. You may appreciate symphony, but do you appreciate opera? No. It's very simple, because voice is more integral to that culture from which that kind of music has come. So this is a very able explanation of a musical phenomenon which takes place every day in our life. Further, for example, what instruments travel? Instruments do travel naturally. Very interesting that who plays what kind of instrument? Let me ask you this question. In the earlier days, very interestingly, tabla was not taken up by Brahmins, because tabla is made of, as you know, leather, and higher caste Brahmins thought that they cannot touch that leather. Similarly, Shehnai was not played by Brahmins, because the Shehnai reed would have a bone in it, and you cannot touch a bone. Who played a dholak? Who played mridangam? In the south, some of the temples used to have sarangi till the Vaishnava sects become more powerful, because the Shaivites would tolerate a sarangi, but the Vaishnavas cannot, because sarangi has, as you know, animal goods. Now this is in a way a factor which is not directly related to music, but at the same time it controls your musical behavior, and it comes from your cultural understanding. At the same time, you will see that those castes which used to play tabla will be able to play dholak, tasha, nagara. So this we call horizontal mobility. But then, the moment, I will also give another example from the tabla field now. How many women used to play tabla 15 years back? No. Why? Because it requires more strength? No. What's the reason? There is a sexual symbolism involved there. All drums are supposed to be symbols of women, so they cannot play themselves. Or a flute. Who will play the flute? That flute is a phallic symbol, so women will not take it up. And at the same time, in the sculptures you find that women used to play this. Who were those women? They were not ordinary women. They were apsaras. They were yakshinis. And that was a supernatural caste. This is where mythology comes to your aid and tells you that who plays what kind of music. It's very easy to understand. I will give you another example. As you know, I work with a lot of folk musicians. Some of them are from Tamasha, Lavani singers. And I remember in Marathi there is a kahavat, Mahara gharchi lavani, Brahmana gharchi lekhani, Vanya gharcha tarazu asai म्हटलंय पुढे. The point is that these Mahari lavani, I listened to them and tremendously high pitched voices. So once I asked them, how is it that you have such high voices? And he said, because we do not eat ghee. Because we do not eat ghee. It was his simple answer. Now go back to your theory of music. It will tell you that ghee means kapha. And kapha will not produce a high voice. Ayurveda tells you that. The point is that this is how culture controls every part of your behavior. And then you have to look at it. I have also asked this question, why is it that people from, say, Dharwad, Belgaum area have higher voices? Because they eat a lot of chilies. I mean, this is one kind of dietary explanation. Ethnomusicology makes you aware that the music which you make is not a result of your knowledge alone. It's a result of a totality of process under which you are brought up. Why is it that, again going back to some of the parallel forms here, why is it that Bengalis were fond of dhrupads and only later of khyals? Because Bengal had a tradition of kirtana singing which was akin to Nibaddha Sangeet, and Nibaddha Sangeet came nearer to dhrupads rather than khyal. Now this is how culture intervenes. Culture says, no, you may like this music, but if you want to practice it, you have to change a whole lot of things. For example, in our society today, if anybody wants to take up to ballet, you would say that, well, he or she has a supple body, is motivated, is rich enough, but still these are not the only factors. The whole culture does not support ballet. And that's why people take up to music which is accepted, even if they don't like it. In Maharashtra, for example, you are aware that Ram Joshi was a Brahmin. He was a priest. But he was enamored of Lavani. So he had to deviate, he had to struggle. He had to move out of his society, out of his own culture, and practice that music. On the other hand, Honaji Bala, who was a Lavani singer, he wanted to use ragas because he wanted to come up in the social strata. Ram Joshi wanted to make a transition from a priestly class to other classes because he felt my music, that is music which was associated with the Brahmins, were dry enough. He wanted to have more emotion. He wanted to have more kind of feeling in his music. He wanted to have love sentiment given predominant hand. So he had to change his music. He could not do that through his own music. So musical choices are not automatic. Musical choices are not entirely voluntary. Musical choices are also cultural choices. And ethnomusicology makes you aware. Another example, I have now devised a kind of map of ideas about ethnomusicology, and I call them elements of Indian ethnomusicology, and in which there are many insights offered, but I will give you one or two more. Ethnomusicology also says that song is the most important factor. Mind you, song. If you study history, how many kinds of songs you have? I'm not talking of music. I'm talking of song. Why song is important? Of course, we must define what is a song. So in a very broad manner, you will see, whenever I want to make music, as an Indian, what would be the first step? According to Indian culture and thinking, and your own thinking. Can you think of an answer? What would be the first step? Mind you, I'm not being original. It's very difficult to be original in India because already people have thought so much about these subjects. Indian philosophy, Indian way of thinking tells you Ichha is the beginning. Origin of sound is in Ichha, not in vibrations. That will be acoustics. But Ichha is the first thing. I must have the will. That's number one. Then what would be the next step? Next step would be murmuring. Just murmuring. Trying to sing but not singing. That's the next step, murmuring. Then comes chanting. Then comes recitation. Then comes singing. Then comes song. So this is a continuum. It's a total spectrum. And song comes as a culmination of it. That's why in all kinds of categories, songs are important. Whether it is folk song, primitive, art, it is the song element. Popular song element is very important. And that's why it's interesting to see that all our instrumentalists, when they come from the tradition, they will never say that I am playing an instrument. They will say I am playing a song. मैं गाना बजा रहा हूँ. And they will sing that song. But they will play it and they will say गाना बजा रहा हूँ. What does it indicate? The indication is that song is the culmination. Song is important. So ethnomusicology again tells you nothing is important except the song. And then of course what is a song? There are thousands of theories about it. But I will give you in nutshell 2 definitions of a song. Song is that which can be hummed by everybody. You should be able to hum a song. You should be able to hum it, not able to sing it necessarily. Because singing means others will have to accept that you have sung. But humming, no. Humming is an expression of your own personal inclination to make music. So humming is the end of your musical effort. And it ends there. That's why everybody can hum. And fortunately in India, the whole cultural pattern was such that everybody was allowed to hum. Now of course, we have created audiences and artists. So audiences are supposed to be just listening to you. And we have raised the artists to such a level that they feel that only they have the right to sing. But in earlier days you will find that, well, mothers, grandmothers, fathers, grandfathers, coolies, hamals, workers, everybody used to make music because they were singing songs. So song is extremely important. It's very interesting that, once you have this kind of insight, the whole appreciation of a culture changes. I have some information here, as you must have heard of William Jones, right? He was the first or one of the first Indologists in India. And I'm going to talk about Jayadeva a bit later. He went in search of Indian song. And he said, I never found anybody who is able to sing Jayadeva's Ashtapadi. And he graphically described that process. It's very interesting. 100 years later, you have another Britisher, Captain Willard, Music of India. He says, a very well-made point, the soul of the nation lives in its songs. So unless I understand Indian songs, I won't be able to understand India. So he went on studying Indian music. Very recently I realized that he was working in State Banda. Now State Banda, this also is a recently excavated fact, that State of Banda was ruled by Mastani's son, Samsher Bahadur. So there is a relationship with Maharashtra. So I felt very happy naturally, We in India always think of your own regions first. Later on, perhaps if you have time, you can think of the country. The point is that everybody who wants to study culture today or tomorrow has to realize that it's the music, it's the song which is extremely important. And coming to next point, which is very logical, again goes back, as I said, cultural visions dates back to thousands of years. Ethnomusicology always tells you that somehow music anticipates changes. Music anticipates cultural changes. If you have good ears and you listen to music, you will see that when music changes, it is suggesting to cultural changes. My pet example is in Bombay, I was in school and people told me that in Regal or Eros or somewhere, the first picture about Elvis Presley or pop music or rock music, and people describe very graphically how the spectators danced on the chairs and the chairs broke down, and of course what was given was a graphic account of the aftermath of their dancing. rather than the attitude which made them dance. But it's very obvious that what caught them was the new rhythm, the new pulsating strong rhythm, which can bind down the whole body of people in a moment's notice. And this is very important to note, that at that time it was suggested that, well, what was essential for people? Coming together, becoming a crowd, having a strong rhythm, forgetting the pollution, forgetting the noise. We want to drown out everything by music. And that was the kind of music which held you. And here it's very obvious. You are all musicians, most of you are musicians, I am aware. Think of the tempo. Why is it that tempo slowed down considerably when other life areas were becoming faster, faster and faster? Because that was a reaction, musical reaction against the artificial, excessive tempo in other areas of life. Somewhere we wanted to make a stand, that we want to stand firm. We don't want to be swept away. That's why art musicians specifically, I am referring to them. On the other hand, popular music, which goes with the people, went on increasing the tempo. So it tells us that in the same society, different strata will move towards different kinds of music because there are different kinds of needs. And the needs are to be fulfilled by music. And music suggests you that this is the need. I quote Plato on this point very often. It's my favorite quotation because it's a wonderful insight the man showed. He said that tones are persuasive, rhythms are compulsive. Further, he says, never allow the rhythms in your state to change because that spells anarchy in the state. Now look at that insight. You will see that music is the last thing you allow to change in your culture. You have changed your language, you have changed your diets, you have changed your clothing, you have accepted monetary systems which are foreign to you, you have accepted banking practices which are not known to you, but your music is still yours. You are changing that naturally because you want to. It's your choice. So cultural musicology tells you that music is the most conservative factor because it feels that unless you really want it, it cannot be changed. But if you really want it, it will change. And in that music, then rhythms would be the last to change. Tunes you may change, but rhythms last. And once you have changed the rhythms, that means you have opted for a change. And that's a kind of process which you cannot hold back. All our educationists, all our musicians, all our music thinkers, all our culturologists, all our policy makers are not aware what music is trying to suggest to them. And if we listen to music, not as a raga music, then we will see that all these clues are thrown up in our face. They are trying to speak to us. And this is how music and culture reflect on each other. And one is the cause of the other. And they try to suggest to you not only music, as I said, but music related cultural factors. And that's why they are important. Give you another example. I am quoting you stray examples because this is not a course. We are trying to think about a discipline which is opening up. I ask you a question, why is it in last 10 years people in India seem to prefer ghazal and bhajan? We are all aware. Why? Ghazal and bhajan, why? Because these are the two forms which are trying to give you some text which has a meaning in it. Otherwise, art musicians are notorious for their ignorance of the language which they use in music. In addition, their pronunciations are abysmal. They don't care. They make a theory out of their own, as you know, vices. Majburi ka naam Mahatma Gandhi bana dete. Firstly, they don't know the text of it. Secondly, they don't understand it. Thirdly, they can't pronounce it. So fourthly, they try to garble about it. पहले तो ये भी बोलते थे चुरा लेंगे इसलिए हम नहीं कह रहे. Today they are less ambitious. They know that, there are other sources available. The point is that art musicians never gave you meaningful texts. They failed in that. Film music became meaningless because it is depending more and more on crowds and movements. And movements also, as a person who is involved in analyzing what's happening around, I could see that the movements are restricted in a very divided fashion, that either it is above the waist or below the waist. Whole body is never considered as a unit. They are divisible units to be used for provocating sensuality and not sensibility. And I view it and I say, okay, this is what music is trying to suggest to me. I won't ban it. I can't. And banning never solves the problem. Understanding the problem means you have to understand the motivation, what it is giving, what people are asking for. And that would solve the problem. The point is that I am giving you an example, as I said. Art musicians were not paying any attention to the meaningfulness of the text. Popular music, which was heard most, had done away after 60s with meaningful songs. Folk music was not accessible. That is your own original folk music. You have All India Radio to manufacture folkish music. That also fulfills a need. If folk music is not available, what do I do? Then I have to produce folk music. And people do it. So even that was not accessible, because folk music is not just a matter of listening to it. Folk music is a participatory music. And that I will come back to later, perhaps during the discussion. So folk music was not giving me that. That's why bhajan and ghazal came to the fore. That for the first time in 10 years, people started feeling, oh, meaning is important. And they wanted to get at the meaning. Now that does not mean that all ghazals are meaningful or all bhajans are meaningful. Doesn't mean that. But it follows logically that people were thinking of a way out of this impasse. And they found it in ghazal and bhajan. So these are a few things which ethnomusicology tries to tell you about. Just to give you an idea, I will just read a list of insights which ethnomusicology tries to give you. Apart from the categories and all that, it says, for example, that people have to be musically curious. Curiosity of music. Again, very interesting. How many North Indians are curious about South Indian music? Very few. How many Hindustani musicians are curious about, say, Tibetan music? Even though you have borders with Tibet? No, because we don't have musical curiosity. We are so self-satisfied. We feel so happy that our music is great that we never care to look out. We never try to see what is their music. Even if it is their music, what is that music? So that's why we do not have people who are musically curious. The moment you are musically curious, you start noticing things which are extremely enriching, puzzling, intriguing, challenging, provocating, everything. Then, very interestingly, music is related to non-musical correlates. Now this is extremely important. I am sorry I passed it over. What relationship music has to non-musical items of life? Ethnomusicology has done a lot of studies about that. For example, it says that at every critical juncture of human life, music must be there. Why? Of course, it gets woven into rituals. The moment you have a ritual, you must have music with it. Slowly, we are trying to do away with that music. We are only trying to have a ritual which is also a manufactured ritual. And so we are using the sense of it. But otherwise, traditional tells you that you must have music with it. Why? Because in every ritual, there are moments when you are supposed to reach the inner source of your own strength. You are supposed to reach those levels of your mind which are otherwise not accessible to you. And music helps you in doing it. And that's why everything, whether it is, as you know, naam rakhna hai bacche ka, there is music. आदमी आता है तब भी म्यूजिक होता है, जाता है तब भी म्यूजिक होता है. And very interesting, some of the tribes have the same music for birth and the same music for death also, because they say birth and death are the same. Now this kind of statement music tries to make. The point that I am making is, music is related to non-musical acts and areas of life. People have gone further. Ethnomusicological theoreticians have put forward a thesis. It says that till you are 5 years of your age, whenever there are stress situations, and stress situations, as you know, are many kinds. For example, your ears are pierced, nose is pierced. These are stress situations. Or बच्चे को नहलाना. I mean, for the first time the बच्चा rose because it's something which is very foreign. The body was okay and suddenly you have cascades of water over it and it's also hot and somebody immediately starts shoving things up. This is terrible. And we also continue to have the same kind of hatred about bath even in later life, as you know. Most of theatric situations in Marathi drama till 1940s always had wives trying to tell their husbands, "Ata utha angholila na." Now please get up and have a bath. That was a standard situation in Marathi plays. Because we continue to carry on that same kind of, not exactly pleasurable emotions about the act of having a bath. The point is that if you have stress situations before you are 5 and if you have music along with it, they said that the child later on develops exploratory instincts and tolerance. Now these are studies done in various societies. I am giving a very, as I said, an example which immediately strikes as something which we have not thought before. Naturally, I mean, unless you have a wider definition of music, you will not tolerate that this is music, but this is music, as I said. Or think of lullabies. What kind of lullabies are really helpful in soothing the child? Those which... What kind of lullabies? Can you sing dance and your child will go to sleep? No. Lullaby has to move just above and just below the normal note. And this is the principle of chanting also. Half-tonal distances are alone tolerated in chanting. Chanting does not mean singing a tappa. You can't do that. Otherwise chanting will not soothe you. That music is not supposed to soothe you then. But these musics are. So the point is that non-musical areas of our life which are full of music have also another kind of definition of music, and which is a wider definition, as I said. Perhaps I will just go through the list now. Ethnomusicology also believes that what is important is not this and that, but the relationship. That means, it's not important that, for example, that males in India sing solo music. This is not important. What is important is relationship between males and relationship between singing as an activity. Then one realizes that there are very few concerted choral activities for males in India. Gujarat happens to be perhaps the only exception. The males have a dance there. In Maharashtra, no, males are not supposed to dance. They may jump, but they may not dance. This also is important. Why certain regions do not develop a certain kind of music and certain kind of dance, certain kind of rhythms. I will give you another example. What is the rhythm you can think of when you think of Maharashtra? Dhumari. What is the rhythm you can think of Gujarat? Garwa rhythm. What do you think of Punjab? Khemta. You think of that region and you come across, oh, this is their characteristic rhythm. That's because somewhere that rhythm plays a central role not only in the music which their region produces, but the culture that is produced by their region. People have studied, they say that it's only in Bhangra that people rise above and dance and jump. But other regions, dancing of that kind is not easily done. Because we don't believe in allowing enough freedom to our bodies in other regions. As you know, there are a few things which unfortunately have been marked for centuries. So I am not the author of that, but in Maharashtra, for example, in the 13th century, a traveler from abroad came and he wrote a book, and he went on describing various peoples in various regions. And he says, in Maharashtra, he said, they use forms like dindhale, gindhale. That is, they use forms of speech which include words like dindhale, gindhale. Then he adds kalaha sile. They appear quarrelsome because they were high pitched. The speed of speaking was very high. It was very fast. Now these kind of things ultimately are noticed better when you are away from that culture and when you are an outsider. So this is the relationship which counts. So ethnomusicology says relationships. It's not this music and you, but the relation between you is important. And the relationships are built in various factors. For example, as I said, I refer to the instruments which you use. You may also raise a question, why is it that we accepted piano, harmonium, accordion, all these keyboards which are entirely foreign to our music making? We have accepted that. We have also accepted violin, and of course we have immediately started saying that violin originally belonged to Rajasthan. That's the safest way. So anything which is good first had origin in India. If you come from Rajasthan, it will be from Rajasthan. If you are from Maharashtra, it will be from Maharashtra. The point is that when you choose an instrument, there must be a logic involved there. You had a sarangi. Why you couldn't use that? It's very interesting that the South was the first to accept violin, because by that time they had done away with sarangi. So they wanted a substitute. Because our music is melody making, because we want to have a sustained tone production, because we wanted to have strings which are supposed to be nearest to human voice, so what others was available to you? Violin was the easiest. So violin was well established in India, just as English is well established in India. English is our language. I once told a BBC correspondent who came to talk to me, I said, it's very good coincidence that you are also speaking the same language as I do. I said, I speak English, Inglish. It is Indian English. And I am not apologetic about it. We have contributed to the language. The language belongs to the users, just as music belongs to the users. You make the music which you like. Ethnomusicology makes you aware that you cannot have a book to judge the quality of music. Ethnomusicology makes you aware that music changes whether you like it or not. Ethnomusicology also tells you that music changes because you need change. And it also tells you that qualitatively music tries to reflect and respond to your cultural needs. And that's why music is a barometer. If you have any questions, most welcome. Otherwise, as I said, I'm trying to discuss one case study. Finally, things cannot be too abstract. When people are few, they are good, but that doesn't mean I should tax them. So abstract thinking to a certain extent, but otherwise I am going to discuss Jayadeva's contribution. But if you have any points to raise, most welcome. Yes, right. This is a process which has been, really speaking, going on for last many centuries. But now, of course, the speed of change is now greater. And again, ethnomusicology comes to our aid. It tells us that now what is happening, the character of time is changing. 60 minutes do not mean 60 minutes now. That duration has become smaller. Time has become compressed entity now. It also tells us, really speaking, that our sensibilities are changing. Now people who are doing audience researches, they tell us that your attention span is only 20 minutes now. Beyond that, you cannot concentrate on anything. That's why after 20 minutes, you have immediately a jingle on the television or an advertisement. The point is that these global forces are going to interact. If you become a participant in the change, you will be able to control it. But if you just observe and become a victim of the change, then you are going to suffer. Some months back, we had a seminar in the university, and I said that now all these audio visual media are making a mark in your culture. Why don't you use them for everything that you do, whether music making, music teaching, music learning, music listening, whatever. Now what's happening? You are being exploited by the media. You don't exploit the media. If that you allow to happen, you are going to suffer. But otherwise, the changes are going to be there, and if you are able to take part in the changes, you will be able to control the quality of the changes. The first thing is that even for a knowledgeable listener, what comes first is the sensation part of it. Then comes the sensibility part of it. If it's a very well recorded sound, very well produced sound, it attracts me first. Then I will go for the content. Unless you are knowledgeable. You know, Anand Kumar Swami, in some of his writings, he said, in Indian music, voice quality does not matter. He made that statement in 1920s. Because he said it's the content of music and not the vehicle of music. Now, would you agree to that today? Not really. That's because our sensibility has changed. Let us accept the fact that after 1947, after Lata Mangeshkar came on the scene and after playback was introduced, we are listening to good voices, flexible voices, better recorded, good instrumentation, and at our command anytime. This has affected our sensibility. How can I tolerate anybody's voice today? Why should I? Unless, of course, if I am keenly interested, then I will go beyond that. I will say, okay, voice might be bad, but music is there. But otherwise, for 80% of listeners, it is this sensation which counts. I must have a good sensation. I have listened to number of musicians, and finally I have realized the fact that why is it that पहले से लोग बोलते पहले सुर भर डालो. You know, this भर डालो is very important. Fill the ears with that sound first. So filling of the ears is very important, and then comes the content of it. And that's why, you know, we always say that liking is automatic and personal. Taste is acquired and it's social. If you take harmonium as such, harmony has not been forced on us, we accepted it. You know, in spite of all our protestations, you will see that all the musicians, even, you know, those like Ustad Abdul Karim Khan, who were extremely tuneful, they were able to tolerate and take harmonium throughout their career. Why is it? Because somewhere the full tone of the harmonium, the possibility of having even a ordinary player able to give you a full tone weighed in its favor. And of course we like to have standardizations somewhere, otherwise we feel very insecure. If you want to study harmonium and its acceptance in our culture, you will find extremely important cultural things impinging in. Why harmonium became so popular? Because everybody felt he or she can play it very easily. So people got attracted towards it. Then you will be surprised to hear that in Maharashtra at least, the keyboard, which was known as pedal organ at that time, pipette, it became popular around 1880s. Immediately, that is within 40 years, first book on harmonium was written by a woman in Maharashtra, by one lady called Jhaoba. First book on harmonium. Why? Because harmonium was accessible, because everybody felt a harmonium can enter anywhere. As you know, harmonium was used in kirtans, harmonium was used by stage musicians, harmonium was used by art musicians, harmonium was also used by folk musicians. Because there are so many factors which weighed in its favor. And that's why all the debate about harmonium is, in a way, a part of it has been artificially trumped up debate. People are not honest to themselves. They prefer that kind of accompaniment. That's why they take it. And of course they find certain conveniences in that. And recently I came across a interesting evidence. We are all aware that harmonium was banned by when Mr. Keskar became the minister. Then at that time Rabindranath's letters were quoted that how he also did not like harmonium and all that. Recently I came across correspondence which suggests that Rabindranath's close relative or his admirer was on the All India Radio, who wrote to him saying that we want to ban harmonium, please write a letter in favor of banning the harmonium. Because his words will carry weight. So he wrote a letter obliging for disciples, jana do, kya fark padta hai. The point is that harmonium we have accepted because it's a keyboard instrument which is extremely useful to us. Where the problem is that if we really want to use it, we must insist on using good harmoniums. We must get them tuned properly. We must care about the instrument. Just as you know, in case of microphones now our musicians are becoming very conscious of it. Not exactly knowledgeable, but conscious. What? They always say, badhao, badhao, badhao. You know, that shows that they are giving importance to it, but doesn't show that they are knowledgeable about it. Every time badhao, badhao se music nahi badhta. Sirf awaaz hi badhti hai. But they are conscious that it's extremely important. They want to use it. That's an indication. Similarly, as I said, music is the last thing anybody will accept from other culture unless you really wish it. Music cannot be imposed on you. But if you wish it, you are going to change it. As I said, use more and more audio visual aids in your music teaching, music learning, performances, use better instruments. All this is a part of it. I am not saying that I have a solution here, but I am saying that these are the ways. Similarly about the media. We know that media propagate a kind of music which is very rarely by chance good music. How many of us really protest about it? We switch it off, that's all. But then we must write letters. We must say this is bad music, don't play it. Or this is badly recorded, don't play this recording. We won't tolerate it. I will tell you an example. I was on All India Radio. Everybody commits some mistakes. I did commit that. So I was in All India Radio. And I worked there as a duty officer. And I used to keep a log. Whatever is broadcast, we are supposed to keep a log. And whenever there was a Western music broadcast program, if there was even a hint of scratching of the recording, there used to be 10 telephone calls from Parsi gentlemen. Because they were careful about it. And we had to take care. Bhai wo phone aayega, haan dekho. But so many times in Hindustani and Carnatic music, whatever happened was only God could tolerate. There was never a phone call, never a protest. I can quote chapter and verse, musicians' tolerance of intolerable musical conditions in All India Radio, Films Division, Song and Drama Division, Sangeet Natak Adama, you name the institute and I will quote you examples. We have been extremely apathetic to quality and standards. So what I mean by participation is, yes, take a part in the process of change and we'll be able to guide it. And all the organizations will have to pull their weight. All the media will have to pull their weight. This is a slow process naturally, but then it has to take place. Of course, I mean, even if you feel later on, no problems. I will talk a bit about Jayadeva now. When I started thinking about music and culture relationship in India, as it is reflected in actual music making as well as writings on music, these are the two divisions I made. And then I came across a very interesting list. For example, I call them some eminent ethnomusicologists, known and not so known. Because they worked, but they were not called ethnomusicologists. They never described themselves as ethnomusicologists. But now the list reads, now these ethnomusicologists are those who have worked through their music ethnomusicologically. That is, they have responded to the cultural changes and changed their music. They have deviated. They have been creative because they commented, because they responded to the culture outside. Jayadeva, Amir Khusro, Rana Kumbh, Raja Mansingh Tomar, Swami Haridas, Tansen, Sahasras and Babar Nama, Pundarik Vitthal, Ibrahim Adil Shah II, Aine Akbari, Raga Darpana, Raga Tarangini, then Ramanidhi Gupta, Francis Gladwin, William Jones, Francis Hawke, Shah Alam, Sir Ausle, Wajid Ali Shah, Fox Strangways, Ravindranath Tagore and others. The point I am trying to make is that when Jayadeva responded to the cultural and musical conditions around, he was compelled to change his music, and he changed it in view of the situations pervading. This is the thesis. Now, of course, I am working on that, and there is a program which is hovering in the air and almost in my mind now, which I intend to call it Geeti Bhan, consciousness of song. Now, all these people whom I have mentioned, and in their periods, I have identified songs to represent the changes and their views, and the songs will be presented by singers, and I will comment on what the song implies, but that's a kind of program. The point that I am making here is that when Jayadeva started working, now he was actually working very hard. What are the things which strike you very easily? Firstly, of course, that Jayadeva did many things of which we are not sure. Jayadeva was sure of what he wanted to do, but we are not sure what he did, because the tradition of music which he represented has been lost. So now the sources are, as you know, Gita Govinda text, people who have responded to Gita Govind through various media, and the contemporary cultural situation. These are the sources, right? Now, it's very interesting that what are the salient features of Jayadeva's music making? Very interestingly, firstly, Jayadeva never called himself a singer or a devotee. He called himself a kavi, a bard. Very interesting. Secondly, he went against all the interpretations of religion which were ritualistic, puritanical and ascetic. Thirdly, he married a dancing girl, which was a taboo at that time, and it's also on record that Padmavati, his wife, was a performing partner in his presentations. Further, Jayadeva went away from the earlier Prabandha tradition, and he kind of formulated a format which was not what was happening before, but in a way which indicated things to come. Very interesting that before Jayadeva, what was the tradition? The Charya Giti tradition, Buddhist songs. Charya Giti had ragas, but no talas were mentioned. But Jayadeva is the earliest example we have who mentions ragas as well as talas for his music. As I said, this is highly interesting because tala is an element which, I said, rhythms. They spell a change in the attitude. Further, Jayadeva never believed in what we say as pure music. His music went out and had a dance and theatre to accompany it. His total musical presentation was not vocal music, not instrumental music, but music, dance and theatre together. This is again very important. Now we have musicians who do a lot of drama before they begin music or even during their music. Why do they feel the need to do that? Because they are not able to communicate fully through their own medium. Why is it that film songs are more popular? Because they give you drama, a situation, an incident, an event. That is, you are going out of music, and then music becomes palatable. At that time, that is from 1150 to 1200, when Jayadeva is supposed to have composed, this was the situation. So Jayadeva has all these three together. Very interestingly, it caught on so fast, this kind of music making, that within 200 years, it has spread all over the country. And of course in all walks of life, whether it was literature, sculpture, painting, poetry, drama, whatever. Two interesting inscriptions are available to us, one from Gujarat and one from Puri. The inscription in Gujarat, 2 centuries later, the first line is from Geeta Govinda. And what follows is that this grant is given to the temple to stage a Prekshanaka as in Geeta Govinda. This was laid down as a norm in Gujarat, mind you. And then of course in Puri, as you know, that was a compulsory performance. Nothing else can be performed in that temple. It's only Geeta Govinda. What else? A very striking feature again, Geeta Govinda for the first time in that period of time, so early as I said 12th century, accepted the superiorness of women as contrasted with men's position. For the first time during that period, you have Devi Bhagavata written. Again, as I said, music trying to suggest things what's happening. 100 years later, you have Devi Bhagavata Puran, which extols women's power and not male deities, but female deities. Further, what is Geeta Govinda telling you? It says, okay, you can be a devotee, but you don't have to worship anybody. You can have all the sensuous pleasures of your life. You can have dance, you can have drama, you can have music, but keep Lord Krishna in your mind, that's all. So people felt it's so easy. Anybody can do that. And all the asceticisms, all the yoga practices were kept aside. And this caught on like a wildfire. Now, for musicians, this will be an interesting insight. He calls it, that is the period, that period, throws up a philosophy which can be described as Radha Bhava. Now, Radha Bhava is different thing. What does it include? 2 years back, I gathered a lot of material about Radha and presented a program culling music from Bengal, Gujarat, Haveli Sangeet, Marathi, Lok Sangeet, Lavani, presented and tried to keep before people what Radha means. It was a good program, so it was not received well. But all the same, I enjoyed, and those who listened to enjoyed it. And they felt that something more is received just than music. The point is that this Radha Bhava had certain elements. What was the element? Firstly, of course, as you know, somewhere in Geeta Govinda line is that Padmavati, Sharana, Charana, and there is something else. Perhaps I will have a quotation somewhere. The point is he accepted the superiorness of feminism. That was very important because, you know, he precedes Amir Khusro. He precedes Madhura Bhakti in India. As you very well know, why the Sufis could have a response through Indian hearts, because they talked of a language which was easy to follow, and which only talked of love and compassion. Jayadeva has somewhere sensed the same thing. Just as you know, why Buddha became a force? Because he started talking of compassion. Instead of talking of punya, he started talking of compassion. And that was the point. So here, Gita Govinda, not teaching you philosophy, but singing about what? Singing about this. Who were the characters? I mean, I can go in greater details here. I have worked over that, and some of the points are debatable, so the more the pleasure. But the point here is that when he had Gita Govinda, 24 songs, 12 cantos, 3 characters only, 12 ragas, talas mentioned, the presentation was obviously of a particular kind, which is described as uparupaka in Sanskrit dramaturgy. Very interesting that by 17th century, when we have Bhava Bhatta writing on theory of music, he mentions Ashtapadi but calls it Kshudra Gita. So by those 5 centuries, this devaluation has taken place because Gita Govinda was not traceable. People have formulated other kinds of theories about devotion. As I have pointed out elsewhere, for example, in Maharashtra, we never accepted Madhura Bhakti. In Gujarat, you had Tribhanga Krishna. In Maharashtra, we have Abhanga Vitthal. We don't want to have Krishna with us. Too dangerous. Because Radha Bhava also means Parakiya. So it's not an invitation to promiscuity, but it means something philosophically, highly challenging philosophy. Then Radha Bhava, of course, means that you have to abandon yourself. And what is the goal? The goal is that mental state where all the distinctions disappear. So goal-wise, well, he is talking of the same Ananda, which, see, Ananda Vardhana has talked of, Bharata has talked of, Shankaracharya has talked of, Advaitananda, whatever it is, the same. But I am not using the same language. And that's why Gita Govinda was more accessible, but a highly important deviation from whatever has been practiced during that time. People also tell us that even though the language there is Sanskrit, it has so many elements of Prakrit that people have come up with theory that originally it must have been in Prakrit. And as you know, people in India, if you want to elevate something to the status of prestige, then you have it in Sanskrit, so that nobody understands it, so enough prestige. Just as in England, people used to talk in Latin. All the medical terms, Latin. The moment you say ipso facto, you feel, oh, something great said there. If you say by itself, you are not impressed. Ipso facto, yes. Ergo, oh, wonderful, something. So here was, again, as I said, Gita Govinda, which was written in Sanskrit, but the kind of idiom that he used was full of Prakritisms. And as you know, Prakrit languages are more musical than Sanskrit. Sanskrit is more rhythm oriented, but not song oriented. Prakrit languages are song oriented. And that's why all the devotional poetry is not in Sanskrit, it's in the regional languages, because they are more song oriented. So here was Jayadeva trying to struggle with Sanskrit language. Then what did he do? Another interesting factor. He started using end rhymes, which according to Sanskrit poetics is too cheap an element to be practiced by poets. Because they say if you have end rhymes, then you tend to forget the sense of the line. While Jayadeva says, I don't mind. I want to enter the hearts and ears of the people. End rhymes catch them. So I am going to use end rhymes. He used a lot of alliteration also. Alliteration is nothing but music of pure sounds. When you say Lalita, Lata, Lavanga, what is that? I mean, even if you don't understand anything of it, you get the same liquid sounds again and again, you feel nice about it. So making you feel nice about it, the first element which Jayadeva unabashedly used. And in India, of course, we are very chary of using that. You know, if anybody says, I feel nice about it, you feel apologetic about it. You know, enjoyment is equated with papa in India. Jayadeva never believed in that. He said, no, I want music to be sensuous. I want senses to be used so that I can forget the senses. But I must use them. I mean, what is the rasa dance? As you know, people have already said that it must have been a dance drama, Geeta Govinda. People have also pointed out that Jayadeva with Padmavati must be giving performances all over the country. He must be a roaming kind of person. Very obvious. And to my mind, the way Prekshanaka has been described in dramaturgy, it seems to me that it must have been an advent of the street theatre. Anywhere you have an open space, he would be able to perform it, because no scenery, nothing. You have these three characters and music making and dance, and you can make music. So Geeta Govinda here, as I said, in Jayadeva's vision, stands out as a model of deviating from so many things, because he wanted to make a very important statement about culture through music. And that's why this particular kind of music. As I said, it's very interesting that when William Jones came here, he couldn't find Geeta Govinda anywhere. Captain Willard later on, it's very interesting, he mentions Vishnupada, which, as you know, was a reaction against Ashtapadi. So he mentions Vishnupada but never mentions Ashtapadi, because by that time Ashtapadi was suppressed, or it had gone out of vogue. Then in the 19th century, somewhere people started getting a feeling. It's very interesting that Gwalior musicians started getting a feeling that we must have these Ashtapadis brought back into musical circulation. All the 24 Ashtapadis were tuned by Vasudev Bua Joshi in Gwalior. He hailed from Nagaon near Bombay. Went there, composed the Ashtapadis, and Gwalior musicians used to sing these Ashtapadis. Their Ashtapadis regained the platform once more. And naturally, Ashtapadi meant that you have to be careful about words. You can't say Dhira Samire Yamuna Tire Vasati Vane Vanamali Radhe like Dhira Samir Vanasi Vane. You can't say that. So this was meaningful music, sensuous enough, easy enough, and there is no province in India which will not understand Dhir, Samir, Vasati, Vane, Vanamali, Radhe. Every word would be understood everywhere in India. And that's why Jayadeva appears to me. As I said, I have a long list, but I began with Jayadeva, and I felt that here is a man who was an artist, who was a musician, and who was a visionary. And he was ready to face the consequences. He didn't become popular immediately, obviously. Must have been a lot of hard burning there. Must have been a lot of opposition to him. That happens everywhere. But then he had a conviction of his own music and the views which he wanted to project through music. And that's why Jayadeva stands out as the first practicing ethnomusicologist in India. And as I said, my grand design includes many more. And for example, when I am studying Amir Khusro, I came across a similar kind of vision, that here is a man who says, I am not going to follow Indo-Arabic model because that's foreign to me. I am for Perso-Indian. That is Persian in Indian. But at that time, Persia was a Gandhara Desh, part of the Indian cultural ethos. Political boundaries are never accepted by musicians, fortunately. Whenever they feel music is good, they take it and they practice it. So melodies and instruments wander very freely. And that has happened. So Amir Khusro came out again. As you know, Nucifer, 9 Circles, one of his best known works, he talks of India in ecstasies. And when he talks of India, he says, I am talking of my own country. You know, people nowadays do not understand that the person who was born in Uttar Pradesh, 3rd generation in India, he was an Indian. He was not Turkish. It's only, when politics enters that you start thinking of dynasties. Otherwise you think of melodies. And Amir Khusro was thinking of melodies. And that's why, He has many compositions in which he used to declare. I remember somewhere he said that people call me that I am an idol worshipper. Let them think what they like. I am going to sing the way I do. Please try to understand, in his times, this was the most seditious statement that he could have made. Just as Lokmanya Tilak was a seditious person in the eyes of the British, Amir Khusro was a seditious person in the eyes of the mullahs and maulavis who were ruling there. But he made this statement. He made this statement because he was convinced of it. And the point is that he chose music as a medium to make his statement. And this has always happened. When you have non-musical messages coming through music, the rulers and the politicians never understand the true message, so they allow music. People already receive the message. That's why, if you in Maharashtra or anywhere, you have political plays banned very quickly, but songs remain. They are not aware. Later on they think, oh, this song must be banned. So that's one way of using music very cleverly against the rulers. So with this tip and hint of enough seditiousness, I will stop here, and if there are any questions, most welcome. Otherwise, thank you very much.